I heard my son say he was ashamed of me before I even understood he was talking about me. The words came like a punch to the chest, sudden enough to knock the air out of my lungs. I had never thought of myself as someone who could shatter so easily at 54. But that night, standing in the hallway of Michael's apartment building in Brooklyn, I felt something break quietly inside me. It was early, barely 5:17 p.m., the kind of November evening when the cold turns everything gray and sharp. I remember the smell of someone cooking pasta down the hall, and the faint hum of traffic on Flatbush Avenue drifting up through the windows. I had come a little earlier than planned because I wanted to surprise him. I had even rehearsed how I would say, "You look so handsome tonight, sweetheart," because he always got embarrassed when I complimented him. I had my small gift bag in hand, wrapped in soft paper, the little necklace I bought for Emily because I wanted her to feel welcomed by me. But before I could knock, I heard Michael's voice through the door, low but strained. I don't want them to meet her yet. I'm embarrassed because of her weight." For a second, I truly didn't understand who he meant. There was a pause, my heart beat loud in my ears, and then I heard him say my mom. And everything inside me went still. I stepped back without meaning to, the heels of my shoes clicking against the worn tile floor, the sound impossibly loud in the empty hallway. I remember pressing my back against the wall because I felt dizzy, like the world was tilting away from me. He kept speaking, explaining himself to someone, maybe Emily, maybe one of her sisters, maybe himself, saying he didn't want them to judge him because of me, because I was heavier, because I didn't look like the kind of mother he wanted to present. He said it so quietly, but every word found me with cruel precision. I don't think I've ever hated silence as much as I did then, standing alone, invisible to the person I loved more than anything in the world. I walked away without knocking, without breathing, without letting my shoes make noise. The gift bag slipped from my fingers onto the floor, but I didn't pick it up. I just kept walking until the elevator doors closed around me. The metal walls reflected my face, red and trembling, my eyes wet before I had even realized I was crying. When the elevator reached the lobby, the doorman said, "Good evening, Ms. Porter," but I couldn't make my voice work. I pushed through the revolving door, and the cold air slapped me so hard I gasped. I didn't know where to go, so I started walking down the block toward the subway, clutching my coat closed with both hands like that would stop the shaking. The city felt so big that night, too big for someone like me. The lights blurred through my tears, and people brushed past me without looking, without knowing that something had just broken open inside a middle-aged woman holding herself together on the corner of Livingston Street. I took the train home to Bay Ridge, a 40-minute ride that felt like hours. I sat in the corner seat because I didn't want anyone touching me. I kept hearing his voice in loops, fragments at first, embarrassed, "Wait, don't want them to meet her yet," until the whole sentence replayed again and again, like it had been tattooed onto my skull. I thought I would run out of tears, but I didn't. When I got home, the apartment felt colder than usual. I live on the first floor of a small brick building, a place that has been mine for 14 years. The walls are a soft cream color, and there are framed photos of Michael at every age: toddler with cake on his face, second-grade graduation, his first baseball game, his high school prom. I passed each one as if walking through a museum dedicated to a life that no longer included me. I hung my coat carefully, the way I always do, because habits are comforting, even when the heart is not. Then I went to the kitchen and washed my hands, although I didn't know why. Maybe because something in me felt dirty, stained by the words I had overheard. That night I couldn't eat. I heated up some leftover vegetable soup, but after 2 spoonfuls I put the bowl in the sink. My stomach felt like it had been filled with stones. I sat on the couch with the lights off and listened to the upstairs neighbor arguing with her boyfriend, the dull hum of the radiator, the occasional car passing outside. My hands kept going to my stomach, a habit I've had since childhood, a protective gesture, as if I could shield myself from shame by covering the part of my body most people judge first. I am not thin. I have never been thin. And yet, hearing my son say those words made me feel like my body was something monstrous, something unpresentable, something unworthy of being seen. I slept poorly, waking up at 2:41 a.m. from a dream where I was standing in front of a mirror, but my reflection wasn't mine. It was the reflection of all the comments I had heard over the years, the whispers behind my back, the well-meaning suggestions, the men on the street who yelled things like "move, lady," or maybe "try a salad once in a while." I woke up sweating, my heart pounding. I sat up in bed and stared at the ceiling until the first light of morning crept in through the curtains. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't have many people to tell, truthfully. Most of my friends drifted away over the years, busy with their own families or uncomfortable with the kind of heaviness I carried. Not just on my body, but everywhere else. I used to talk to my sister, but she moved to Florida last year, and we only speak occasionally. So I carried the secret alone. On Monday morning, I went to work at the restaurant in Carroll Gardens, where I am a line cook. The kitchen was warm and loud, filled with the clatter of pans and the sharp smell of garlic and onions. I tied my apron tight, pulled my hair back, and forced myself into the rhythm of chopping vegetables, whisking sauces, sliding trays into the oven. But every time someone said, "Behind you" or "hot pan" are coming through, I flinched, as if the world had become sharper and more dangerous overnight. At 11:23 a.m., during my short break, I stepped outside to get some air. The sun was bright but cold, and the wind pushed strands of hair across my face. I stood there holding a cup of coffee that tasted burned, staring at the people passing by, wondering how many of them had ever felt ashamed of simply existing in their own skin. I felt like I was wearing my shame like a second layer, something visible to everyone who looked at me. And yet no one looked. That was the strange part. I felt exposed, but forgotten at the same time. Michael texted me around 2 p.m. "Hey mom, everything okay? Wanted to check if we're still going to dinner on Thursday." I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. "Sure. Sounds good." I didn't ask about Saturday. I didn't mention the gift bag. I didn't ask who he had been talking to. I didn't say, "You hurt me, Michael. You really hurt me." Instead, I tucked the phone back into my pocket and returned to the kitchen. That night, when I got home, I tried on the blue dress again, the one I had chosen so carefully for meeting Emily's family. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the fabric over my hips, adjusting the sleeves, trying to see what Michael saw. Was it so shameful? Was I so embarrassing? The fluorescent bathroom light made everything harsher. The lines around my mouth, the soft curve of my arms, the fullness of my stomach. I remember whispering, almost without meaning to, "I'm still your mother. Why isn't that enough?" On Wednesday evening, I stopped at a small grocery store on 3rd Avenue to pick up a few things. While I waited in line, 2 teenage girls stood behind me, whispering and laughing. One of them said, loud enough for me to hear, "I would literally die if my mom looked like that." The other giggled. I felt my face burn, and for a moment I thought I might cry right there in front of the refrigerated section full of yogurt cups. But I swallowed hard, paid for my groceries, and walked home as quickly as I could, feeling like the world had turned into a mirror reflecting only the parts of me I wished I could hide. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea, thinking about the first time someone made fun of my body. I was 11. A boy named Daniel pushed me during recess and called me an elephant. I went home crying, and my mother told me to ignore him. "People only hurt you when they're hurting inside," she said. But I learned over time that people hurt you because they can. Because it's easy. Because they know you won't fight back. And somewhere along the years, maybe I started to believe that I deserved it. And yet something inside me was shifting now, slowly, painfully, like a bone beginning to heal from a break. I didn't know what the shift meant yet, whether it was anger or grief, or the faintest spark of something I had forgotten how to feel. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending nothing had changed. On Thursday, I arrived early at the little Italian restaurant where Michael and I were supposed to meet. It was 6:02 p.m., and the air smelled of roasted chestnuts from a street cart nearby. I sat at the table by the window, watching people walk by, my hands trembling slightly. When Michael arrived, he greeted me with a hug, but it felt different. Lighter. Hasty. Like someone performing a gesture, rather than expressing it. He sat down, took a sip of water, and started talking about work, about how busy he'd been, how stressed, how everything felt overwhelming lately. I nodded and smiled, even though I could barely focus on his words. The whole time I wanted him to look at me, truly look at me, and see the hurt he had caused. And then, when the waiter stepped away, I cleared my throat. "Michael," I said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." That was the moment something shifted for good, the quiet spark becoming a flame, though I didn't know yet what it would burn away or what it would illuminate. I watched his face carefully, searching for some sign that he already knew what I was about to say, but he just looked at me with that polite attentiveness people use when they expect something small, something easy to handle. My pulse thudded in my ears. I opened my mouth once, closed it, then tried again. "I went to your apartment last Saturday," I said. His expression flickered, just barely, like a light bulb that almost burns out. "I came early. I thought we could walk to meet Emily's family together." I stopped talking there because suddenly my throat felt too tight. Michael set down his fork. "You did," he said, voice cautious. "Yeah," I whispered. "I heard you before I knocked." For a moment, silence stretched between us, thin and brittle. Michael's shoulders tensed, and he ran a hand over his face. "Mom," he began, but I lifted my hand slightly to stop him. He went quiet. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted to the window, then back to me. I didn't want to say the words out loud. Repeating them felt like tearing open a wound. But I forced myself. "You said you were embarrassed because of my weight." Something in him collapsed then. He didn't move, didn't blink for a second. "Mom, I didn't mean," he started, but the look in his eyes told me he knew he couldn't justify it. He stumbled over his own breath, searching for explanations. "It came out wrong. I was overwhelmed. I was stressed. He swallowed, his cheeks reddening. "I didn't want them to judge us." Us. That word landed strangely, sharp and cold. I realized he saw my body as something tied to him, something that could harm him socially, something he needed to shield others from. The realization hollowed me out. I kept my voice steady, even though my insides trembled. "So you left me standing in the hallway," I said softly. "Alone. Because you thought I might embarrass you." He slumped back in his chair, ashamed but still trying to manage the narrative, like so many people do when confronted with the harm they've caused. "Mom, I didn't think you would hear." I exhaled a shaky laugh. "That's the problem, Michael. You didn't think. Or maybe you did, and that's what scares me." He didn't answer right away. People around us talked, silverware clinked, a baby cried at a table near the back, but everything felt muted, as if the world had stepped aside to give us space to break. Finally, he said, "Lo, I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix it. I know it was wrong. I don't know why I said those things." The apology floated between us, incomplete, unsatisfying, too small to hold the gravity of what had cracked open inside me. I nodded slowly because I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't ready for forgiveness. I wasn't even sure forgiveness would ever feel natural again. We finished the meal quietly. He paid, insisting on it, maybe out of guilt. When we hugged goodbye outside the restaurant, his body felt stiff, unsure, as if neither of us knew how to fit anymore. I walked home through the cold night air, my breath coming out in faint clouds, and I kept hearing the echo of his words on the subway ride back. "I'm embarrassed because of her weight." I repeated them silently until the meaning dulled enough for me to breathe. That night, I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling while my mind replayed years, decades, of little comments I had swallowed, moments where I'd shrunk myself emotionally to take up less space, believing it was my responsibility to make others comfortable. But hearing my own son express shame about me awakened something that refused to shrink anymore. I didn't know what that something was yet, whether it was anger, exhaustion, or the beginning of self-preservation, but it pulsed quietly inside me, waiting. On Friday at work, everything felt unbearably loud. The noise of pans clattering, the rapid chop of knives, the hiss of butter hitting hot metal. It all scraped my nerves raw. Matteo, the head chef, asked me twice if I was okay. I nodded and said yes, but my voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. During my break, I stepped outside again, standing in the same spot as earlier that week. The same cold wind swept through the street. I watched a couple laughing as they walked past me, and I wondered when I last laughed like that, freely, without overthinking how I looked, what people saw, whether my body took up too much of the frame. I went home earlier than usual, claiming a headache. When I reached my apartment, I went straight to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out the blue dress again. I laid it on the bed. It looked so innocent, so hopeful. I remembered the day I bought it, how the saleswoman had told me the color looked beautiful with my skin tone. I remembered how I had spun in the dressing room, imagining myself walking into that dinner with Emily's family, imagining pride, belonging, possibility. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the weight of everything settling over me, heavy but clarifying. Saturday morning brought an unusual quiet. I woke up at 6:09 a.m., the early light creeping through the blinds. I made coffee, toast, and stood by the kitchen window watching the street slowly come alive. Kids in jackets walked with their parents. A man jogged past with his dog. A woman carried groceries in both hands. Ordinary life, steady and indifferent to anyone's heartbreak. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, feeling the heat seep into my fingers. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Michael. "Can we talk later?" I hesitated, then typed back, "Not today. I need time." His reply came quickly this time. "I understand." I didn't know if he truly did. That afternoon, I forced myself to go outside. I walked along Shore Road Park, the air sharp with the smell of the water, the sky a pale winter blue. The Verrazano Bridge loomed in the distance, strong and unshakable. I envied it. As I walked, I watched people pass me by without a glance. Sometimes that invisibility hurt, but today it allowed me to stay inside my thoughts without interruption. As I walked, I began remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. The doctor who told me at 29 that I should lose weight if I ever wanted to be taken seriously in life. The coworker who once asked if I could fit behind a counter. The man I dated briefly who suggested we avoid restaurants with booths because they're not very accommodating to bigger girls. Michael had grown up hearing all of this. Maybe I had taught him without meaning to, taught him to see me through the eyes of people who judged first and humanized later. By the time I got home, the sun had begun to set, and the sky was streaked with orange and violet. I set my keys on the table and sat down, warmth from the radiator humming through the apartment. Then something unexpected happened, a moment so simple it startled me. I realized I didn't want to be this version of myself anymore, the version who quietly absorbed every wound and told herself it wasn't important. I didn't have a plan, but I felt the first stirrings of resolve. A small shift, but undeniable. 2 days later, on a Monday morning, as I was tying my apron at work, Matteo approached me. He tapped my shoulder gently. "Helen, can I talk to you for a second?" I followed him to the back storage area, confused. He closed the door behind us and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before, something between concern and admiration. "I saw how you talked to the new prep cook yesterday," he said. "You handled her panic perfectly. You're patient. You're steady. You're the kind of person this kitchen needs more of." I blinked, confused. Then he said something that made my breath catch. "I know this might sound sudden, but I want to offer you a promotion. Sous chef." I froze. "Me?" I whispered. He nodded. "You've earned it. You're good. Better than good. You're consistent. You take care of people. You make the kitchen better." My throat tightened because I wasn't used to being seen like that. Not for my body, not for my shortcomings, but for my capability, my competence, my presence. I felt a heat rise behind my eyes, but I swallowed hard, forcing the tears back. "I don't know what to say," I murmured. Matteo smiled. "Say yes." That moment, that unexpected recognition, that validation of my worth, struck me like a shift in gravity. Something inside me clicked into place. It was the first spark of a very different kind of turning point, the kind that begins quietly but will reshape everything afterward. And that was the moment the first real change began inside me. I said yes, though my voice barely made a sound. Matteo clapped my shoulder gently before walking back into the kitchen, leaving me standing alone in the storage room with the faint smell of basil, garlic, and cold metal shelves surrounding me. My hands shook as I tied my apron again. A promotion. Me. The thought felt unreal, almost like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. For years I had moved quietly through every space I entered, trying not to take up too much room, trying not to inconvenience anyone. And suddenly someone had looked directly at me and said, "You matter here. You make things better." The words clung to me long after I stepped back into the heat of the stove line. That night, when I got home, the apartment felt a little different. Warmer. Or maybe it was me who felt warmer, standing at the sink washing dishes as steam rose around my hands. I kept replaying Matteo's voice in my head, and for once, the loop didn't hurt. It built me instead, piece by piece. After drying the plates, I went into the living room, where the blue dress still hung on a hook behind the door. I stared at it without touching it. That dress had been meant for a woman who believed she was already enough for her son's world. Maybe I still was. Or maybe I was finally becoming enough for my own. Around 8:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Michael again. "Mom, can we please talk tonight?" I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the screen. Then I typed, "Not tonight. I need space." He replied, "Please don't shut me out." I read the message 3 times before turning the phone face down on the table. Giving myself space wasn't shutting him out. It was finally giving myself room to breathe. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I stepped outside to take the trash out and felt the cold air sting my cheeks. The sky was still dark, but streaks of pale blue were starting to pull at its edges. I stood there for a moment, barefoot on the concrete, feeling strangely awake. A thought came to me, small, quiet, but persistent. I wanted to write down how I felt. Not for anyone else. Just so I wouldn't forget this moment where something in me had finally shifted. I went inside, grabbed an old notebook from the drawer, and sat at the kitchen table. I wrote slowly, the pen scratching across the page. I wrote about the hallway outside Michael's apartment. The blue dress. The girls at the grocery store. The subway ride. The ache in my chest. Matteo's words. The first breath of dignity I'd felt in a long time. When I finished, the page was full. My handwriting leaned slightly to the right, like it always does when I'm nervous. I closed the notebook and pressed my palm against the cover. It felt like I had stored part of my heart inside it. That week, I started noticing small things I never paid attention to before. The way my shoulders naturally curled inward when someone walked past me. The way I avoided mirrors unless absolutely necessary. The way I apologized too quickly, even when I hadn't done anything wrong. I began catching myself in those moments. Not correcting them, not yet, but noticing. Seeing myself with eyes that weren't trying to look away. On Thursday afternoon, while I was prepping vegetables, Matteo approached me again. "You should take the lead on the new pasta special next week," he said, and I stared at him, startled. He smiled. "You've got good instincts. Trust them. Trust yourself." The phrase settled over me like a warm blanket. Trust yourself. I hadn't done that in years. Later that night, when I sat in bed, I opened my phone and typed a sentence into the Notes app. "I don't want to disappear anymore." I didn't know what it meant then, but I felt something tug inside me, a desire to step back into my own life, even if slowly, even if clumsily. On Friday, I went to the grocery store again. At the entrance, I felt that same familiar tension coil in my stomach, the anticipation of judgment. But this time, instead of shrinking, I stood still for a moment, breathing. I told myself, "You are allowed to exist here. You are allowed to take up space." Then I walked in, head held a little higher. No one stared. No one whispered. And it struck me how many years I had lived afraid of ghosts that only came alive in my own mind. But the real shift happened that Sunday. It was early afternoon, and I had just finished folding laundry when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Michael stood there, holding a paper bag of pastries from our favorite bakery on Fifth Avenue. The moment I saw him, my chest tightened. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept well. "Mom, can I come in?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I stepped aside and gestured quietly. He walked in and set the pastries on the table. The room felt too quiet, too full. I waited for him to speak. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd done since childhood whenever he didn't know how to start. "I know you're upset with me," he finally said. "And you have every right to be." He swallowed hard. "I've been thinking a lot since Thursday. I need to explain something. Not as an excuse. Just so you know the whole truth." I braced myself, not knowing where this was going. He sank into the chair, elbows on the table. "I grew up watching people treat you differently," he said softly. "Teachers, neighbors, strangers on the street. I saw the way they looked at you. How they made assumptions about you. I would get so angry. But over time," he paused, voice cracking. "Over time I think I absorbed it. I let the world teach me that your body was something to be ashamed of. And I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Something warm and painful spread through my chest. Hearing his confession didn't erase the hurt, but it showed me another layer. The way shame travels through generations, slipping silently from one person to the next. He continued, "I wasn't embarrassed by you. I was embarrassed for myself. Afraid of being judged. Afraid Emily's family wouldn't accept me because they might think I came from." He struggled to finish. "From less." There it was. The truth behind the truth. Not my weight. Not really. But class. Status. Appearances. Everything this city trains people to care about, loudly and relentlessly. Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I hate that I made you feel small. You're the last person in the world who deserves that." A part of me wanted to reach out and comfort him instinctively, the mother in me rising like a reflex. But I stayed still, because the hurt in me was still real, and the space I was learning to claim for myself mattered just as much as his remorse. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. "But I need time, Michael. This wound is deep." He nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I understand. I love you, Mom. I love you so much." I held his gaze. "I love you too. But love doesn't undo everything instantly. Sometimes love needs time to breathe." He left shortly after, promising to give me space. When the door closed behind him, I leaned against it, feeling both heavier and lighter at once. His confession had shaken things loose inside me, old memories, old patterns, old versions of myself I wasn't ready to carry anymore. The following week, I started changing small habits. In the mornings, instead of rushing out the door, I stood in front of the mirror for 30 seconds and forced myself to look, really look, at the woman staring back. The soft roundness of her stomach, the curve of her arms, the lines around her eyes, the life etched into her skin. I whispered, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes shakily, "You are allowed to exist. You are allowed to take up space." It felt strange at first, almost embarrassing, saying words no one had ever said to me willingly. But slowly, the phrases began to root themselves somewhere inside me. One evening, while walking home from work, I passed a small yoga studio with a sign in the window, "Classes for every body." The phrase lingered in my mind longer than I expected. I stood there on the sidewalk, debating with myself, feeling the old fear gnawing at me. The fear of being judged, of not fitting in, of being the biggest person in the room. But then I remembered Mateo's words. "Trust yourself." Before I could change my mind, I opened the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender. A woman at the desk smiled warmly. "Welcome. First class is free." Her smile didn't falter when she looked at my body. She just handed me a clipboard. As I filled out the form, I felt my heart pounding, but this time it wasn't entirely from fear. Part of it was anticipation, hope, maybe even bravery. The class was gentle, slow, and surprisingly emotional. My body trembled during the poses, my balance wavered, and there were moments when I wanted to leave. But the instructor's voice was calm and encouraging. "Your body is not your enemy. Your breath is your anchor." At the end, when we lay down in the dim room for the final relaxation, tears slipped quietly from the corners of my eyes. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. After class, the instructor approached me. "You did beautifully," she said softly. I shook my head. I struggled. She smiled. "Struggling is part of the beauty." I nodded, unsure how to respond, but deeply moved. That night, I wrote 2 full pages in my notebook. Not about Michael, not about the hurt, but about myself, how I felt in my own skin, how I wanted to feel, how maybe the world had lied to me about what bodies like mine deserved. And then came the moment that changed everything again. It was late Wednesday evening, around 10:47 p.m. I was brushing my teeth when my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. The text said, "Helen, is this you? It's Emily's mother, Patricia. Do you have a moment?" My heart lurched. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't know how she got my number. I didn't know why she was contacting me. My hands shook as I typed back, "Yes, I'm here." A moment later, another message appeared. "I'd like to talk to you. I recently learned something, and I think you deserve to hear it from me directly." A chill ran through me. Something was coming. Something big. Something that would make everything shift again. This was the second Reviravolta beginning to unfold. My first instinct was to ignore the message. To pretend I hadn't seen it. To avoid whatever new wave of shame or pity might be waiting on the other side of that conversation. For a full minute I stood there in the small bathroom, toothbrush in hand, foam in my mouth, staring at my phone as my heart pounded a hard rhythm against my ribs. I rinsed my mouth, dried my hands slowly on the towel, and walked to the living room. I sat down on the edge of the couch before replying. "Yes," I typed again, even though I had already said it. "I'm here. What is it?" The typing bubbles appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. It was a strange intimacy, watching someone I had never met hesitate in a space so close to my own life. Finally, a longer message arrived. "I found out about what happened last Saturday," she wrote. "About Michael not inviting you to dinner. About what he said." My stomach dropped. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "How?" I typed before I could stop myself. There was a brief pause. "Emily told me," she replied. "She overheard part of the conversation. And later, she asked him about you." I didn't know what to answer. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I typed carefully. "What did he tell her?" This time, she didn't text back. Instead, my phone started ringing. I stared at the caller ID for 3 full rings before I forced myself to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Helen? This is Patricia." Her voice was calm, low, with the kind of warmth some people naturally carry. "Thank you for picking up. I know this is probably uncomfortable." I swallowed. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear whatever she was about to say, but I knew I would regret it if I hung up. "I'm sorry to call so late," she continued, "but I didn't want to go to bed without at least trying to reach you. I wanted to say something directly woman to woman, mother to mother." I closed my eyes for a second and took a breath. "I'm listening," I said. There was a soft exhale on the other end, like she was choosing her words carefully. "Saturday night," she said, "there was a strange tension at dinner. I noticed it, but I didn't know why. Emily was quieter than usual. After everyone left, she and I stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up. And then she told me she'd overheard Michael earlier that day, saying he didn't want us to meet you yet because he was embarrassed about your weight." Hearing the phrase again out loud, from someone else's mouth, felt like being slapped. Even though I already knew, even though I had replayed those words 100 times in my head, hearing them from a stranger made my throat burn. "I see," I managed to say. "The thing is," Patricia continued, her voice tightening, "Emily was upset. Very upset. She told him that what he said was cruel. That it wasn't okay. She asked him if he had at least told you were invited. When he said he had, but that you weren't coming, she looked at him in a way I've only seen her look at people who've truly disappointed her." A strange mixture of pain and relief bloomed inside me. Part of me wanted to sink into the couch and disappear. Another part wanted to hold on to the fact that someone somewhere had heard those words and called them what they were, cruel. "I didn't know any of this," I said quietly. "I showed up early. I heard him. I left." There was a pause on the line. "I'm so sorry, Helen," she said softly. "No mother should ever have to hear something like that from her own child." I felt tears prick my eyes. For years, I had been told I was too sensitive when comments about my body cut too deep. To hear another woman say, without hesitation, that what happened was wrong felt like someone lifting a weight off my chest, if only slightly. "Thank you," I whispered, "for saying that. I want to be very clear about something," she went on. "You were invited. You are invited. You have always been part of this, whether we've met yet or not. I've seen pictures of you. Emily has told me about how hard you've worked, how you raised Michael on your own, how you've always supported him, even when it wasn't easy. I never cared what size you are. I care about the kind of woman who raised the man my daughter loves." I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying to steady my breathing. Her words landed gently, but with enormous force. The kind of force that rearranges something inside you. I didn't know what to say, so for a moment I said nothing. "I understand if you don't want to see any of us right now," she added. "I wouldn't blame you one bit. But I also didn't want you to be sitting somewhere thinking we were part of the reason you were being hidden. We weren't. This was Michael's fear. His shame. Not ours. I let that sink in. Michael's fear. His shame. Not mine." The distinction felt like someone drawing a line with a bright marker between where I ended and where other people's projections began. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "Really. It means more than I can say." She hesitated, then said, "I'd like to meet you, when and if you're ready. Not as a formality. Not as Michael's mom. As you. You sound like someone I'd like to know." An unexpected warmth spread through me. It had been a long time since someone said they wanted to know me, not as an extension of my son or my role, but as myself. "I don't know when I'll be ready," I admitted. "But maybe someday." "That's enough for now," she said gently. "I won't push." Just know the door is open. And if you ever want to talk again about anything, Emily has my number. You can reach out. No pressure. We talked for a few more minutes about simple things, where we lived, what we did for work, the quirks of New York weather. The everyday details somehow made the heavy conversation feel more grounded, less surreal. When we finally said goodnight, I ended the call and sat there in the quiet of my living room, my phone resting in my lap. The apartment felt different. Not warmer, not colder. Just larger somehow. As if some invisible wall had shifted a little, letting in new air. I got up and walked to the hallway. The photos of Michael looked back at me from the walls. For the first time as I studied them, I didn't just see my son. I saw myself. The woman behind the camera. The woman packing lunches, wiping tears, working double shifts, clapping from the bleachers. The woman he had tried to hide. I traced my finger lightly along the frame of his high school graduation photo. You did what you thought you needed to do, I murmured, more to myself than to him. But so will I. That night, before bed, I wrote in my notebook for nearly an hour. I wrote down everything Patricia had said. I wrote about how it felt to be seen by a stranger more clearly than I had been seen by my own child in a long time. I wrote the sentence, "Their shame is not my mirror." Then I circled it 3 times. The days that followed moved in a strange rhythm. At work, I adjusted to my new responsibilities as sous chef. I coordinated prep lists, gave directions, calmed minor panics when orders piled up. Some days I felt strong and capable, even proud. Other days, the old doubts crept in. The voice that told me I was an imposter, that they would eventually realize they'd made a mistake promoting me. But every time that voice grew too loud, I'd remember Matteo's calm eyes, the way he said, "You've earned it." And I'd reach for that instead. At home, I kept going to the yoga studio. Twice a week at first, then 3 times. The instructor, whose name was Lila, learned my name quickly. She never commented on my body. She always commented on my effort. "Great stability today, Helen. Beautiful breathing. Strong focus." Those phrases began to stitch themselves into the empty spaces where my confidence used to be. On the subway, I watched women of all sizes and shapes scrolling through their phones, leaning against poles, resting their heads on windows. Some looked exhausted. Some looked content. Some looked like they were trying not to cry. It struck me how little we truly knew about the storms and victories happening inside people we passed every day. Michael and I texted occasionally, but the messages stayed on the surface. "How are you? Work okay? Need anything?" There was a new carefulness between us, a hesitancy. He didn't push for in-person meetings, and I was quietly grateful for the space. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after the phone call with Patricia, something unexpected happened at the restaurant. A food blogger came in. We didn't know who she was at first. She sat alone at a small table near the back, wearing a mustard-colored coat and glasses. She ordered the new pasta special, the one I had created and led, a dish with roasted cherry tomatoes, garlic, basil, and a lemony ricotta. I watched from the pass as she took her first bite, my heart thudding with a familiar nervousness. She closed her eyes, nodded slightly, and took another forkful. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the tickets. 2 days later, Matteo pulled me aside, his phone in hand and a grin on his face. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen toward me. A local food blog had posted an article. "Hidden gem in Carroll Gardens, the pasta that feels like a warm hug." The photos featured our restaurant. The writer described the dish in detail, praising the balance of flavors and the comforting quality of the meal. And then halfway through the article I saw it. The sous chef, Helen, has a gift for translating comfort into food. You can taste the care in every bite. My name. On a screen. In a context that had nothing to do with my body, my weight, or my appearance. Only my work. My talent. My heart. I stared at the words, my vision blurring. "I'm going to print this and frame it," Matteo joked. I laughed, but my voice wobbled. That night, at home, I looked up the article again on my own phone. I took a screenshot and saved it. Then, impulsively, I sent it to Michael with a simple message. "This happened today." He replied almost immediately. "Mom, this is amazing. I'm so proud of you." His enthusiasm hurt and healed at the same time. For the first time in weeks, I let myself respond with something a little more open. "Thank you," I wrote. "I'm trying to build something that's mine." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his message was different from the others. "I notice," he wrote, "and I'm trying to become someone who deserves to be part of it." I sat with that for a long time. Days slipped into weeks. Winter settled over the city fully by mid-January. On January 22nd, a Sunday, snow fell thick and soft over Brooklyn, muting the sounds of traffic. I stood by my window with a mug of hot chocolate, watching children build crooked snowmen on the sidewalk. The world looked gentler under the white. That afternoon, my phone chimed with a group text. A number I didn't recognize added me to a new chat. The name of the group made my breath catch. Family, wedding planning. I almost exited the chat immediately. Instead, I forced myself to read. "Emily, hi everyone. I thought we could use this space to coordinate things for the next few months. Mom, Dad, Michael, and Helen, I hope this is okay. I'd really like us all to be on the same page. My name again, right there alongside theirs. Included. Patricia, works for me. Thanks, love. Her father, whose number was saved as Tom. Great idea. Then, a separate message appeared from Emily directly to me, outside the group. Hi, Helen. I know this might feel sudden. I also know Michael hurt you, and I'm not trying to erase that. I just want you to know, I want you there. In all of this. Not as an afterthought. As my family, too. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. For years, I had told myself that expanding my world emotionally was too risky, too painful. And yet here was this young woman, reaching out, offering a place at a table I'd been told I wasn't fit to sit at. It would have been so easy to say no. To protect myself by staying at a safe distance. To hold on to the hurt and let it be the final definition of my role in Michael's life. Instead, I found my fingers typing almost of their own accord. Thank you, Emily. I'm still healing, but I'd like to try. As soon as I hit send, fear and relief collided inside me. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing. In the weeks that followed, the group chat came to life. Venue options were shared. Photos of flowers, dresses, table settings. Little jokes. Small disagreements about music and guest lists. Sometimes I stayed quiet, just reading. Other times I offered small suggestions. A bakery I knew that did beautiful cakes, a song I loved that might work for a slow dance. Every time someone responded kindly, a small part of my chest loosened. Then, one evening in early February, Emily sent a message directly to me again. Mom and I are going to look at dresses next Saturday in Manhattan, she wrote. I'd really love it if you came with us. Only if you're comfortable, of course. I read the message 3 times. The word tugged at me, with us. I thought about it all night. I imagined the store, the mirrors, the thin saleswomen, the other mothers. I imagined feeling out of place, being the only one whose body didn't match the glossy magazines. Old fears rose quickly, ready to talk me out of it. Then I remembered myself standing in the yoga studio, trembling but staying. I remembered Patricia's voice saying, I'd like to meet you. I remembered the blog post with my name in it. I remembered the way my hands moved in the kitchen when I was in my element, sure and steady. The next morning at 7:12 a.m., before I could convince myself to back out, I replied, I'll come. I put the phone down and walked to the mirror. I looked at myself in my faded pajamas, hair pulled back messily, face bare. For the first time, instead of rushing through the moment, I let myself hold my own gaze. You are not a shameful secret, I whispered. Not anymore. I didn't know then that the day of the dress shopping would become another turning point. Not because of any cruelty, but because of something else entirely. Something that would force me to see, with painful clarity, how much of my life I had spent apologizing for my body, and how, for the first time, I was beginning to step out of that role. And I had no idea that in the middle of all those lace and silk gowns, a single honest question would change everything I thought I knew about myself and about the way others saw me. The boutique was on a quiet street in Midtown, tucked between a cafe with fogged windows and a florist that smelled like lilies even from the sidewalk. When I arrived, the sky was pale gray, and the air had that crisp bite February never fails to bring. I wiped my palms on my coat before opening the door. A small bell rang overhead, soft and delicate, completely unlike the storm happening in my chest. Inside, everything was white. White walls, white displays, white dresses cascading from racks like clouds. Soft music played, piano notes drifting lazily through the space. 2 young saleswomen turned toward me with practiced smiles. For a moment, I felt like a blot of ink dropped on a clean page. Too noticeable. Too wrong. Then I heard Emily's voice. Helen, over here. She waved from the back, standing with Patricia. Both of them beamed when they saw me, genuinely, as if they were actually happy I was there. Something in me unclenched. Patricia walked over and hugged me gently, the kind of embrace that didn't assume anything about my comfort, just offered warmth. I'm so glad you came, she said. Her tone made it sound like she meant it. Emily grabbed my hand. Mom's trying her first dress. Come see. Mom. She called Patricia Mom, but when she looked at me, her eyes softened in a different way, like she saw me as something more than an accessory to the groom. I followed them to a fitting room where Emily's younger sister, Claire, was zipping Patricia into a gown. It was lace, fitted at the waist, elegant without being loud. When Patricia stepped onto the platform in front of the mirror, she laughed nervously. Oh dear, I haven't worn something like this in years. Emily clapped. You look beautiful. And she did. Not because the dress transformed her, but because she wore it with a kind of ease, a woman fully allowed to take up space. When Patricia turned to me and asked, What do you think? I blinked, startled. She wanted my opinion. I smiled softly. I think you look lovely. Her eyes glowed, as if the compliment mattered more coming from me than from anyone else. As she tried on more dresses, the room filled with laughter, small debates, excitement. I stood back sometimes just observing, but each time Emily noticed, she reached for me, offering a swatch, asking my thoughts, pulling me closer into the circle. And then came her question, the one that pierced me open. They were discussing neckline styles when she turned to me suddenly, tilting her head. Helen, what kind of dress would you have worn? If someone had given you the wedding you deserved? The room went silent for a moment. Not out of discomfort, out of attention, out of sincerity. And something inside me broke. No one had ever asked me that. Not my ex-husband. Not my mother. Not even myself. I had been 23 when I got married, in a quick courthouse ceremony with a dress I bought on clearance. Not because I loved it, but because it hid my arms. No music. No celebration. No joy. I had told myself I didn't need those things. I had told myself they weren't meant for women like me. I swallowed, feeling unexpectedly raw. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't think I ever believed I deserved something beautiful. Emily's expression softened. That's not true, she said quietly. You do. Everyone does. Something warm and painful rose in my chest. I looked down, blinking back tears. And when I finally looked up again, I found all three women watching me with kindness, not pity but recognition. As if they saw every part of the girl I used to be, the woman I became, and the woman I was trying to grow into. After a moment, Patricia touched my arm gently. Well, if you ever want to try on dresses just for fun, I'd love to do that with you. No occasion needed. The word sat inside me like a stone dropped into water, sinking deep, sending ripples outward. When it was Emily's turn to try her first dress, she stepped into the fitting room. A few minutes later, she emerged in a gown that made the entire space fall silent. Soft, flowing fabric. A delicate V-neck. Gentle beading across the bodice. She looked ethereal. Patricia gasped. Claire started crying. Even one of the saleswomen clutched her chest. And then Emily turned to me. Do you like it? It felt like a test, but not in the cruel sense, in the trusting sense. She wanted my voice in the moment that mattered most. I stepped closer, my throat tight. You look. I exhaled, letting the truth settle on my tongue. You look like someone who knows exactly who she is. She smiled, eyes glistening. That means more coming from you than anyone else. The day went on smoothly, but something subtle had shifted. Before, I felt like a visitor in a world built for other women. Now I felt like an invited guest, not fully belonging yet, but no longer hiding at the threshold. After the final dress was chosen, we walked to a cafe nearby. The air smelled of espresso and warm pastries. Patricia ordered tea for us, and Emily insisted on paying. We sat by the window, the city moving around us. At some point, Emily looked at me seriously. Can I ask you something? I nodded, unsure where this was going. Do you still want to come to the wedding? The question wasn't accusatory. It was gentle. It was an offering. I hesitated. I thought of the hallway outside Michael's apartment. The sting of his words. The way my heart had split open. I thought of Patricia's late-night phone call. The yoga studio. The food blog. The tiny, growing parts of myself learning how to breathe again. And then I realized something quietly profound. I didn't want to attend the wedding because I was Michael's mother. I wanted to attend because I was Helen. Someone who was finally, slowly learning that she was allowed to exist in her own story. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle my voice. Yes, I said. I want to be there. But not as someone who's hiding. Not as someone who thinks she's lucky just to be invited. I want to be there as myself. Emily nodded, her eyes shining. Good. Because that's exactly how we want you there. We finished our drinks, hugged goodbye, and went our separate ways. When I stepped back out into the cold city air, something felt different. Lighter. Brighter. As if for the first time in a very long time, I was walking towards something instead of away from it. On the subway ride home, while the train rattled beneath me, I opened my notebook. And without thinking too hard, I wrote, I am becoming a woman I would have been proud to know. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest. I didn't know it yet, but I was walking straight toward the third Riviera Volta, one that would shake the foundation of everything I thought I understood about my body, my value, and the way I deserved to be seen. When it arrived, it didn't come from Michael. It came from someone I never expected to notice me at all. It started on a Tuesday night in late February, the kind of night when the city feels half asleep and everyone looks a little worn down by winter. The restaurant was busy but not chaotic, a steady hum of conversation and clinking glasses filling the air. I was at the pass, calling out orders, wiping plates, adjusting garnishes before the servers whisked them away. My body moved almost on autopilot now, muscle memory guiding my hands. I felt solid there. Sure. It was one of the few places in my life where I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing. Around 8:15 p.m., Matteo nodded toward a small table in the corner. That's the photographer I told you about, he said under his breath. The one who sometimes does features on local spots. I glanced over quickly. A man sat alone, mid-50s maybe, with salt and pepper hair and a beard that made him look like someone who read a lot more than he talked. He had a camera bag at his feet, and a notebook open beside his plate. Don't stare, Matteo added with a smirk. Just do what you do. I didn't think much of it. People came and went. Some wrote reviews. Some never did. I focused on the food. When the ticket came in for his order, I saw that he'd chosen my pasta again, the one from the blog. My chest tightened, but I exhaled and went to work. I tossed the pasta, checked the seasoning, added a little extra lemon zest. For reasons I couldn't quite explain, I wanted this plate to be good. Not for the restaurant. For me. When the server picked up the dish, I turned back to the stove. I didn't look at the photographer's table again. I stayed busy until the rush eased and the dining room slowly emptied. By 10:30 p.m., only 2 tables remained. Matteo clapped my shoulder. Go take 5, he said. You've earned it. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the hallway near the restrooms, leaning against the wall for a moment with my eyes closed. When I opened them, he was standing there. The photographer. Sorry, he said, raising his hands slightly, as if not wanting to startle me. I didn't mean to sneak up on you. I straightened quickly, suddenly hyper-aware of how I must look. Flushed, hair frizzing around my face from the heat, apron stained with sauce. Can I help you? I asked, my voice more clipped than I intended. He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't rush, the kind that waited for you to meet it. I hope so, he said. I was looking for the person who made that pasta. I blinked, caught off guard. That would be me, I said. Well, I developed the recipe at least. The whole kitchen works on it. He nodded. I know how kitchens work, he said lightly. But I could taste something in that dish that felt very specific. Like someone cooked from memory, not just technique. No one had ever said anything like that to me. People called food delicious, comforting, rich. No one called it specific. I felt a strange shyness creep in. I grew up cooking with my grandmother, I admitted. She used to say food should taste like a place you miss. I guess some of that snuck in. His eyes warmed. There it is, he murmured. That's what I tasted. He held out a hand. I'm Daniel, he said. I do photography and some writing for a couple of small magazines. I also run a little project on social media, highlighting the people behind neighborhood kitchens. Faces that don't always make it to the front page. I hesitated before shaking his hand. My palm felt calloused against his. I'm Helen, I said. I'm the sous chef here. I know, he said. Then he surprised me. I asked for your name. Matteo didn't hesitate. The thought that Matteo had spoken of me so naturally, as if my contributions were an obvious thing to share, made my stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. I glanced down at my apron again, tugging it instinctively. I'm a mess right now, I muttered, half to myself. You look like someone who's been working hard all night, he said simply. That's not a mess. That's evidence. I didn't know what to do with that sentence. Compliments about my body had always come with a twist, a joke, an implication. Compliments about my work were still new enough to feel unreal. But there was something in his tone that made me believe he meant exactly what he said. No more, no less. What's the project? I asked, trying to ground myself in practical questions. He pulled out his phone and scrolled. It's called Hands That Feed Us, he said. Photos, short stories, sometimes videos. Line cooks, dishwashers, bakers, aunties making food out of tiny home kitchens. I try to show the human stories behind the dishes people Instagram to death. He turned the screen toward me. I saw images, rough hands dusted with flour, a woman laughing over a pot of stew, a man in a tiny deli cutting meat with absolute focus. None of them looked like models. They looked like people. Real. Lived in. Unposed. I'd love to feature you, he said. Only if you're comfortable, of course. My first reaction was no. No, because cameras and I had never been friends. No, because every photo of me always felt like a reminder of the body I'd been taught to hate. No, because being visible still terrified me. But another part of me, quieter and newer, leaned in. The part who had read the blog and saved the screenshot. The part who had stood in yoga class and let herself shake. The part who had said, I want to be at the wedding as myself. What would it look like, I wondered, if the first time I really let my face be shown to the world as Helen wasn't as Michael's mom, but as someone whose work mattered? I hesitated for a long moment. I could feel the familiar panic rising, the kind that made me want to make a joke, change the subject, disappear. Instead, I took a slow breath. What would it involve? I asked. Some photos here in the kitchen, maybe 1 or 2 outside, he explained. A short interview. Nothing too intense. You can say no to anything you're not comfortable with. You'll get to approve everything before I post it. He was giving me control. That mattered. I chewed my lip. Can I think about it? Of course, he said immediately. Take your time. I'll be back in a few days anyway. This place is too good to stay away from. He smiled again, that unhurried smile, and started to turn away. But before he left, he added over his shoulder, for what it's worth, I think people would be lucky to see the person behind that pasta. The words followed me around for the rest of the night. When I got home, I was too wired to sleep. I made chamomile tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook. I wrote. Someone wants to show my face to the world not as a joke, not as a warning, but as the source of something good. My hand shook as I wrote the next sentence. I'm scared, but I'm tired of letting fear be the loudest voice. The next time Daniel came in, 3 nights later, I was ready. Sort of. I saw him the moment he walked through the door, camera bag across his shoulder. My stomach flipped. I focused on the tickets in front of me, but my pulse sped up. After the rush slowed, he appeared in the kitchen doorway, waiting until Mateo waved him in. Well, he asked softly. I wiped my hands and met his eyes. Let's do it, I said. But I want to approve every photo. Obviously, he said. It's your story. The photo session itself was surreal. He asked me to just do my job while he shot. At first, I was stiff, hyper-aware of every angle, every fold of fabric, every place my body might look too much. But Daniel stayed mostly quiet, occasionally offering small directions. Stay just like that for a second. The way you're holding the pan is perfect. Look at the plate the way you do when you're checking seasoning. There. That's it. That's you. Once, when I glanced up sharply and caught his camera mid-click, I scowled. Please don't use that one, I said, embarrassed. He lowered the camera. Actually, that one's my favorite, he said gently. That's the look of someone who takes her work seriously. But if you hate it, we can throw it away. No question. I didn't know how to respond to someone who seemed more concerned with my comfort than with his artistic vision. So I nodded and returned to the stove, oddly calmer. After the kitchen had closed and the last dish was washed, we sat at a small corner table with his laptop open between us. He showed me the photos one by one. At first, I wanted to flinch away. My body looked exactly like it does in the mirror. Round, full, soft beneath the apron. But there was something else there too that mirrors never quite captured. Intensity. Focus. The set of my jaw as I tasted a sauce. The way my eyes narrowed when I plated a dish. The small, almost invisible smile I wore when I watched a plate leave the pass. That's what he'd seen. I look big, I said, before I could stop myself. You look like someone in charge, he replied, tone matter-of-fact. The kitchen bends around you. That's what I wanted to show. The comment landed somewhere deep in my chest. I scanned the photos again. Maybe he was right. Maybe the fact that I took up space wasn't a flaw here. It was part of the story. We chose 5 photos together. He typed while we talked, asking me questions about my life, my grandmother, the blue dress I'd hung on my door, the moment I'd overheard my son. I surprised myself with how much I shared. And with how carefully he listened, fingers still on the keys but attention fully on me. When he finally posted the feature a few days later, he sent me the link. I stared at it on my phone for a long time before tapping. There I was. My name at the top. Helen, the quiet heat behind Carol Garden's coziest pasta. A close-up photo of my hands sprinkling basil over a steaming dish. Another of me at the stove, profile visible, expression serious. Another at the end of me looking directly at the camera, a small, reluctant half-smile on my face. The caption beneath the last photo read, "People think comfort food is about the ingredients. It's not. It's about the person who refuses to give up on making something warm for a world that hasn't always been kind to them." Helen feeds her neighborhood the way she spent years feeding her son. Fully, relentlessly, even when she feels invisible. This is her face. Remember it the next time a meal makes you feel at home. I had to set the phone down. My eyes blurred almost immediately. No one had ever written about me like that. No one had framed my softness as strength, my persistence as anything other than obligation. My phone buzzed repeatedly over the next hour. "Mateo, you're a star. Lila from yoga. Just saw this, so proud of you. A server from work. You look badass, chef." Then another message. From Michael. I sat up straighter when I saw his name. "Mom, I just saw the article." His next message came quickly. I read it 3 times. "You look powerful." I stared at the word. Powerful. The girl who had been pushed on the playground for being too big. The woman who had learned to walk through grocery store aisles like a ghost. The mother who had stood outside her son's door and listened to him call her an embarrassment. Powerful. I didn't know how to respond. So I didn't, not right away. I let myself feel the word fully first, turning it over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by the sea. The next day, something happened that might have felt small from the outside but shook me deeply. As I was leaving the restaurant after a long shift, a young woman stepped in front of me on the sidewalk. She looked barely 20, bundled in a thick coat, scarf wrapped around her neck. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold. "Excuse me," she said, voice timid. Are you Helen? From the article?" My heart stumbled. "Yes," I said slowly. "That's me." She exhaled in visible relief. "I've been walking back and forth for 10 minutes trying to get the courage to say hi," she admitted, laughing nervously. "I saw your story. The photos. What you said about cooking and feeling invisible sometimes. I wanted to thank you." I blinked. "Thank me?" She nodded quickly. "I work in a bakery down the street," she said. "I'm fat too." She said the word without flinching, but I could hear how heavy it still felt on her tongue. "I never see people like us shown as real. As talented. Not as jokes. Not as before pictures. Seeing you up there, just being you? It meant a lot. I stood there on the sidewalk, the city buzzing around us, and for the first time in my life, I felt the shape of something I'd never allowed myself to hold. Influence. Not the loud, glamorous kind. The quiet kind. The kind that says, without fanfare, you're not the only one. You're not wrong for existing. What's your name? I asked. Sophia, she said. We talked for a few minutes. She told me about rude customers, about health advice she never asked for, about watching her thinner co-workers get treated like they belonged while she tried to disappear into the background. I listened. I understood. I told her honestly that I was still figuring things out myself. But before we parted, I said, you deserve to be seen for your work. Not just your size. Her eyes filled with tears. So do you, she said. That night, lying in bed, I realized something quietly explosive. My body, the same body I had been taught to hate, was not just a site of shame anymore. It was a signal. A beacon. A mirror for women like Sophia, like me, who had walked through life believing they were alone. The third shift in me didn't come like a storm. It came like that conversation. Small, simple, human. It was the realization that my life, my actual messy, imperfect life in this round, aging body, had value beyond what anyone else decided it was worth. And with that realization came a new, unfamiliar kind of anger. Not the bitter kind that eats you from the inside. The sacred kind that says, I will not allow myself to be erased anymore. Not by strangers. Not by my son. Not by my own reflection. When the wedding invitations finally arrived in the mail 2 weeks later, I didn't feel like the same woman who had once dropped a gift bag on a hallway floor and fled. I felt like someone who had walked through fire and realized her skin was still intact. The envelope was thicker than I expected. Heavy paper, cream-colored, my name written in Michael's handwriting across the front, Mom. No last name, no formalities. Just that 3-letter word that had held my entire life inside it for 30 years. I stared at it on my kitchen table for a long time before opening it. It was a Tuesday evening in early March, 7:08 p.m., the city outside my window humming with its usual tired energy. I had just gotten home from work, my feet sore, my shoulders tight. The radiator clicked softly in the corner. A pot of leftover soup cooled on the stove. Ordinary details. The kind that make extraordinary moments feel even stranger. When I finally slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the card, I had to take a breath. Emily and Michael. Invite you to join them. As they begin their life together. The date. The venue. A small, elegant script. It was beautiful in a simple, unfussy way. At the bottom, in smaller letters, there was a note. We are especially honored to share this day with the woman who taught Michael what devotion means. Love. Emily and Michael. I felt something press against my ribs from the inside, like my heart was trying to stand up after being hunched over for too long. I sat down at the table, invitation in one hand, the other resting over my stomach out of habit. I remembered the hallway. The dropped gift bag. The words that had sliced me open. Embarrassed because of her weight. The sentence had once lived in me like a poison. But now, as I held the invitation, it felt like something else was flowing through my veins. Not antidote, exactly, but something that made the poison lose its strength. I placed the card carefully on the fridge with a magnet. I wanted to see it every day, not as a reminder of what my son had done, but as a reminder of who I was choosing to become. Several days later, Emily texted me. Do you know what you're going to wear? I stared at the screen and then turned slowly toward the blue dress hanging on the back of my bedroom door. It had been there so long it felt like part of the room. A relic from the night everything broke. I walked over and ran my fingers along the fabric. It was still beautiful. Still soft. Still mine. But I wasn't the same woman who had bought it. I took it down and unfolded it, holding it against my body in front of the mirror. The color still worked. The cut still flattered me. But when I looked at myself, I didn't see desperation anymore. I didn't see a woman begging silently to be allowed in. I saw someone different. Someone who'd survived. I took the dress to a small tailor shop on 3rd Avenue, the kind with handwritten notes taped in the window. The woman behind the counter was in her 60s, hair pulled back in a tight bun, glasses perched on her nose. She pinched the fabric here and there, humming thoughtfully. What do you want? She asked, standing back. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I wasn't sure how to put it into words, so I went with the simplest truth. I want to feel like myself, I said. Not less. Not more. Just fully myself. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. We can do that, she said. She let out the hem just enough for it to skim my calves instead of cutting across my knees. She softened the neckline slightly, not to hide my chest, but to make it feel intentional. She added a small, almost invisible stitch at the waist that made the fabric fall in a way that honored my shape instead of fighting it. When I went back a week later to pick it up, I stepped into the dressing room, zipped myself in, and stepped out to the mirror. The dress was still the same blue. The same fabric. The same size. But I stood differently inside it. My shoulders were more open. My chin was a little higher. My eyes. I didn't look away from myself this time. The tailor smiled. There, she said. That's you. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up before my alarm. It was April 20th, a cool spring day, the kind where the air smells faintly of rain even if the sky is clear. I made coffee and toast, ate slowly at the kitchen table, then took a shower that ran a little too long because I kept standing there, letting the hot water drum against my back while my thoughts unraveled and reknotted. What if people stared? What if they whispered? What if, despite everything, some part of me still waited for Michael to flinch when he looked at me? I turned off the water and stood in the steam, breathing in and out. One of Lila's phrases from yoga floated into my mind. Your body is not a mistake. It's a record of survival. I dried off, moisturized, and took my time getting dressed. The blue dress. A pair of comfortable but elegant shoes. A silver necklace my grandmother had given me. Simple makeup, enough to even out my skin, soften the shadows, give my lips a hint of color. When I was done, I stood in front of the full-length mirror and forced myself to look, really look. I saw the curve of my arms, my soft stomach beneath the dress, the way the fabric hugged my waist. I saw the lines around my eyes from years of squinting in kitchen steam. I saw the gray in my hair that had become more pronounced in the last 2 years. I put my hand on my chest and whispered, just loud enough to hear myself over the hum of the radiator. You are not their embarrassment. You are your own miracle. The car arrived at 2:15 p.m. The venue was in a converted warehouse in Dumbo, with exposed brick walls and big windows that looked out over the East River. When I stepped out of the car, the wind coming off the water lifted my hair slightly. I smoothed my dress and walked toward the entrance, my heart beating way too fast. Inside, the space buzzed with nervous excitement. Guests laughed, hugged, adjusted collars and dresses. Soft music flowed through the air. The lighting made everything warm, golden. I signed the guest book and took a program. Emily and Michael, it read, in the same script as the invitation. 2 families. 1 story. Patricia spotted me first. Her face broke into a genuine smile as she walked toward me, her dress a deep green that made her eyes look bright. Helen, she exclaimed, reaching for my hands. You look. She paused, searching for the right word. Radiant. I almost laughed. Radiant was not a word anyone had ever used about me before. But the way she said it, without hesitation, made me believe she meant it. Thank you, I said, my voice a little shaky. You look beautiful too. She squeezed my hands. I'm so glad you're here. Then Emily appeared, hair swept back, not yet in her wedding dress but still glowing in a simple silk robe. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears almost immediately. You came, she said, relief and emotion layered in her voice. Of course I came, I replied. And I realized I meant it. She hugged me, careful not to smudge her makeup, but firm. When she stepped back, she studied me from head to toe. That color is perfect on you, she said. I'm stealing you for at least 1 photo today. Non-negotiable. The old fear flared briefly at the word photo. Images of myself frozen in time, every perceived flaw immortalized. But another, newer part of me, the part that had looked at Daniel's pictures and thought, I look like someone in charge, spoke up. Okay, I said. But you have to promise to send me a copy. Done, she said, then winked and was swept away by planners and bridesmaids and last-minute details. I found a seat on the aisle near the front, where the families would sit. As people filled in around me, I caught a few curious glances, but no one whispered, no one pointed. A couple of Emily's relatives introduced themselves. An aunt, a cousin, a grandfather who insisted on telling me a story about how Emily used to insist on sleeping with a whisk in her crib because she loved watching her mother bake. And then suddenly the music shifted. Everyone stood. Michael walked in from the side, not from the back like he would during the procession, but from a door near the front. He was in a navy suit, tie slightly crooked in the way it always had been since he was a teenager. For a moment he seemed to scan the room, eyes darting across the crowd. And then he saw me. Our eyes locked. The noise of the room faded. It was just us for a heartbeat, suspended in something that was not quite past and not quite present. He walked toward me slowly, weaving between chairs until he reached my row. People stepped aside, murmuring, curious. Mom, he said, standing in front of me, voice low and tight. You look. He swallowed. You look beautiful. The word made my throat ache. Thank you, I said softly. I thought he was going to move on, go back to wherever he was supposed to be before the ceremony started. Instead, he did something I didn't expect. He took a breath and then turned around to face the rows behind us. Excuse me, he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, his hands shaking at his sides. Can I have your attention for a second? The chatter quieted in a ripple. Heads turned. Patricia looked over from across the aisle, brows lifting in question. My heart hammered. I wanted to stop him, to protect him, to say you don't have to do this. But something in me also knew that maybe he did. He glanced at the officiant, who was standing off to the side flipping through his notes, and then back at the crowd. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said. I know we're about to start. There's something I need to say before we do. Mostly to one person. But I want everyone to hear it. The room fell completely silent. He turned back to me, eyes shining. Mom, he said, voice breaking slightly. A few months ago, I did something I'm deeply ashamed of. Some of you know. Some of you don't. He swallowed, visibly fighting to keep his composure. I told Emily I didn't want her family to meet you yet, because I was embarrassed by your weight. A rustle went through the crowd, quiet and sharp. Heat rushed to my face. For a moment, I wanted the floor to swallow me. But then I realized something. This time, I wasn't alone in a hallway. I wasn't hidden behind a closed door. I was right here, standing in my blue dress, in front of everyone. Michael's voice shook harder. It was a cruel thing to say. It was a lie about who you are. And it came from a place in me that was more worried about how I looked to other people than about the woman who fed me, supported me, and stayed when everyone else left. He took a shaky breath. I've apologized to you privately. But I need to do it publicly. Because I hurt you publicly, even if you were the only one who heard it. I could feel people looking at me now, but the gazes felt different. Not hungry. Not mocking. Witnessing. He took another breath. Mom, I'm not ashamed of you. I'm ashamed of myself. For letting this world's messed up ideas about bodies and status, and acceptable mothers get inside my head. For ever making you feel like you weren't enough. You are more than enough. You are the best part of my story. My eyes blurred completely then. A tear spilled over and slid down my cheek. I let it fall. Michael's next words came out quieter, but somehow they filled the whole room. If anyone here ever looks at my mother and sees anything less than strength, sacrifice, and love, that's their failure. Not hers. He turned back to me, eyes now full of tears. I know I can't undo what I said. I know I have to earn your trust again. But if you'll let me, I want every person in my life to know how proud I am to be your son. The room held its breath. Emotion swelled so high in my chest I thought it might choke me. I could have stayed seated. I could have nodded and let the moment settle. But the woman I was becoming, the woman who was tired of shrinking, tired of disappearing, did something else. I stood up. The chair scraped softly against the floor. I stepped toward him, my dress brushing against my legs, my pulse thundering. I put my hand on his cheek, like I used to when he was a little boy with scraped knees and nightmares. Shame belongs to those who choose cruelty, I said quietly, but clearly. Not to the bodies they aim it at. A few people wiped their eyes. Someone sniffled loudly. I looked around the room then, at Emily, tears streaming down her face, at Patricia, hand pressed to her chest, at strangers who would likely forget my name but remember this moment. I am not a secret, I said, more to myself than to anyone else. Not anymore. Michael nodded, tears falling freely now. Will you? He hesitated. Will you sit in the front with us? Be in the photos? All of them? Old reflexes flared, the urge to say, oh, you don't have to, it's fine, I don't mind staying in the back. But I shut them down gently. They'd ruled me long enough. Yes, I said. I will. He exhaled, relieved. Thank you, he whispered. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way weddings often are, vows, laughter, the slip of rings onto fingers, the soft tremor in voices when promises felt too big, and yet somehow just right. But underneath all of that, for me, was a quieter ceremony happening inside. The younger version of me, the one who had been called names on playgrounds and crowded off benches, the one who had stood outside her son's apartment holding a gift bag and a breaking heart, was being invited into a different kind of story. At the reception, there were indeed photos. So many photos. At first, I tensed with every flash, every click. But as the night went on, something loosened. In one shot, Emily looped her arm through mine, pulling me close, both of us laughing at something ridiculous Patricia had said. In another, I was dancing clumsily with Michael, his hands steady at my waist. At some point, Daniel appeared. I shouldn't have been surprised. He moved in circles like this more than I did. When he saw me, he lifted his camera slightly, a silent question. I nodded. Later that week, another post went up on his page, this time with a different kind of caption and a new, unexpected ripple. It was a photo of me and Michael on the dance floor, mid-laugh, my head thrown back, his eyes crinkled. The blue dress swirled around my knees, my body was fully in frame, unapologetic. The caption read, months ago, this son called his mother an embarrassment because of her weight. Today, in front of everyone, he named himself as the one who was wrong. Growth is messy. Accountability is heavy. But this is what repair can look like when we stop treating shame as something we pass down and start treating love as something we grow up into. It wasn't viral in the way people mean when they talk about millions of views. But it spread enough, friends of friends, local accounts, people who saw themselves in the story. Comments poured in. My son said something similar to me once. Maybe I'll send him this. Your courage gives me hope as a fat mom. I needed this. Thank you. One comment near the top caught my eye. From a user named Softspines. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was my child being ashamed of me. Now I'm starting to realize the worst thing would be me being ashamed of myself. Thank you for reminding me to stand up in my own life. I read that comment 5 times. A few weeks later, a small online magazine picked up the story, combining it with the earlier food feature. The headline made me laugh and cry at the same time. Brooklyn chef turned son's cruel comment into a lesson on fat shame, family, and the power of showing up. They used one of Daniel's photos, me at the stove, steam rising, face serious, body taking up space without apology. If someone had told the younger version of me that one day my life would be summarized in a headline like that, I would have thought they were cruel for joking. Now it felt like a strange kind of justice. Life didn't suddenly become easy. That would be a lie. There were still days when I caught my reflection at a bad angle and winced. Days when the world's contempt for bodies like mine felt so loud it drowned out all the softer voices I'd been collecting. There were visits to the doctor where I had to insist they look beyond the number on the scale. There were comments under articles, anonymous mean lazy, that reminded me how far we still had to go. But there were also other things. There was Sophia, who eventually invited me to her bakery, proudly placing a warm cinnamon roll in front of me and saying, "I'm the one who made this." There were other women in my yoga class who started staying a little after to talk, to share stories about family, food, and the strange ache of trying to love yourself in a world that profits when you don't. There was Mateo, who promoted me again, slowly shifting more responsibility into my hands, telling me one evening, "You know this place could run without you, right?" There was Patricia, who started texting me recipes and asking for advice, saying things like, "You have a better eye for seasoning than I ever will." There was Emily, who slipped into my booth at the restaurant one slow afternoon, pressing her hand over mine and whispering, "I'm really glad I get you as a mother-in-law." And there was Michael. We never pretended the hallway moment didn't happen. We didn't bury it under new memories and call it healed. Sometimes, out of nowhere, I'd see a flicker of shame pass through his eyes when we stood together in front of a mirror or took a photo. But instead of swallowing it alone, he started naming it. "That old voice is talking again," he'd say quietly. "The one that cared more about what other people think than about what's actually true. I'm trying to turn it down." We went to therapy, separately at first, then together. We talked about childhood, about messages absorbed, about the ways we both had learned to see my body through someone else's funhouse mirror. It was uncomfortable, messy, necessary. Healing was not linear. Some days, I still flinched when he reached for my hand in public, waiting for someone to sneer at the sight of us. Some days, he overcompensated, posting photos of me with captions like, "My beautiful mom," that felt more like he was performing his growth for the world than settling into it. But gradually, something steadier emerged. We learned how to stand next to each other without either of us disappearing. 1 year after the wedding, on a soft Sunday in late spring, I stood in my kitchen, light pouring through the window, the smell of tomato sauce filling the apartment. I was cooking for more people than usual. Emily sat at the table flipping through a magazine. Michael was slicing bread. Patricia was setting out plates. Sophia was coming by later after her bakery shift. I moved around them easily, my body familiar to the space, my presence woven into each movement. At some point, Michael watched me stir the sauce, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "You know," he said, "I used to think the biggest day of my life would be my wedding." I smiled without looking up. "And now," he said, stepping closer, "I think the biggest day of my life was the day you decided not to disappear because of what I said." I paused, spoon hovering over the pot. I turned to look at him, heat from the stove warming my face. "You didn't give me that day," I said gently. "I did. But I'm glad you were smart enough to notice." He laughed softly, eyes bright. "Fair point." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the apartment was quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. The pages were thick with months of ink now. Anger, grief, gratitude, moments of fear, moments of pride. I turned to a fresh page and began to write some things I had learned, not as rules, not as advice, but as truths I wanted to remember the next time the world tried to make me small. First, shame grows best in silence. The moment I started saying what hurt me out loud, it began to lose its power. Second, my body has never been the problem. The problem has always been the gaze that refuses to see me as whole unless I fit into a narrow, brittle idea of acceptable. Third, love is not an excuse for cruelty. Not from strangers. Not from family. Not even from myself. Fourth, I cannot control whether people are proud to stand next to me. I can only control whether I am proud to stand next to myself. I closed the notebook and rested my hands on the cover. The city buzzed softly outside my window. Somewhere, a car alarm blared briefly then quieted. A neighbor's television murmured faintly through the wall. My kitchen smelled like garlic and basil, like all the Sundays of my life stacked on top of each other. I walked to the hallway and looked at the photos again. Now they included new ones, me at the yoga studio, laughing with other women. Me at the stove in the restaurant, flames leaping from the pan. Me in the blue dress, standing between Michael and Emily on their wedding day, our shoulders touching, my smile real. I used to think the most painful sentence I would ever hear was my son saying he was embarrassed to show me to the world because of my weight. Now I know the most powerful sentence I will ever say is this: I am not the shame he once felt. I am the woman he had to grow up enough to stand beside.